Let me share something that could genuinely shift how you think about money. The wealthiest people on the planet break down like this: 75% are entrepreneurs, 15% are investors, 7% inherited their wealth, 3% are athletes, entertainers, or artists, and 0% are regular salaried employees. Read that last number again. 0%. Not a single person in the top tier of global wealth got there by simply collecting a paycheck their entire life. So if you want to handle money the way the top 1% do, you need to understand what those first four groups share. Entrepreneurs own businesses. Investors own assets. Wealthy heirs own trusts. Athletes, entertainers, and artists own rare, irreplaceable skills. The pattern is obvious once you see it: if you don't own something, you are what's owned. You become the asset someone else is profiting from. That's the piece most people never figure out, and honestly, most people are never meant to figure it out, because the system runs on people who don't. So how do you start owning things? You follow the 25-15-50-10 rule. I built this framework so that anyone, regardless of income level, can manage money the way the top 1% do. Because the truth is, it's never about how much you earn. It's entirely about what you do with what you have. I've personally used this system for decades, and it took me from having nothing, no money, no connections, no credentials, to building genuine, lasting wealth. The rule works at any income. It worked for me when I had very little, and it still drives how I think about every dollar today. The first 25% of your income goes toward growth. This is the portion that works on your behalf while you sleep, while you're at the gym, while you're having dinner. By growth, I don't mean personal development or mindset work, though those matter too. I mean physically putting this money into things that increase in value over time and eventually generate income on their own. Most people cash their paycheck, cover their bills, and spend whatever's left on things they won't even remember a week later. A subscription here, a meal out there, a random online purchase at midnight. And then the cycle resets. Next paycheck, same pattern. That's the trap keeping the overwhelming majority of people from building anything real, and honestly, it's not entirely by accident. The system benefits from keeping you financially stretched, rushing from one paycheck to the next with no room to breathe, no margin for error, no time to think strategically. That pressure forces you to keep grinding just to stay at the same level. Once you see that clearly, you can start pushing back. Take that first 25% and redirect it into assets, things that grow over time and generate returns while you're busy doing other things. Eventually, if you stay consistent, those assets could outpace your salary entirely. That's when everything changes. You might think you don't have enough to start investing. But that's exactly the wrong way to think about it. You need to find the money, because timing matters more than amount, and the cost of waiting is enormous. Here's a concrete example. Marcus started investing just $200 a month at age 20. Daniel waited until 30 but decided to put in $300 a month to make up for lost time. By the time both reached 60 and stopped, Marcus had put in $96,000 total and Daniel had contributed $108,000. So Daniel saved more overall, which means he came out ahead financially, right? Not even close. Assuming a 10% average annual return, the long-run historical average of the S&P 500, Daniel's portfolio grew to $678,146. Genuinely solid. But Marcus? His reached $1,264,816. He invested $12,000 less in total and ended up with nearly $600,000 more, purely because he started a decade earlier. That gap isn't luck or skill. It's compound growth doing exactly what it's designed to do. Time in the market beats almost every other variable. Start now, even if the amount feels embarrassingly small, because waiting costs you more than you'll ever recover. So where should you actually put this money? Think of your options as a spectrum running from lower risk and steady to higher risk and potentially higher reward. At the safer end, index funds are where most people should begin, and honestly, where most people should keep the majority of their money for a long time. You're not trying to pick winning stocks or time the market. You're simply buying a diversified slice of the entire market, something like the S&P 500, which tracks 500 of the largest companies in the US. You don't need to monitor charts or make active decisions. You set it up, automate contributions, and let it compound quietly in the background over years and decades. Next on the scale is real estate. If you have the capital, rental property can generate strong returns through both appreciation and monthly income. If you don't have the capital for a full property, REITs, real estate investment trusts, let you invest in real estate by buying a small share alongside many other investors, similar to how index funds work. The barrier to entry is much lower and you still get exposure to the property market. In the middle of the scale are high-income skills. This is actually one of the most underrated investments you can make, especially early on. Learning something valuable, copywriting, sales, coding, video editing, data analysis, design, can generate returns faster than almost any financial instrument. If you put $500 into a course that teaches you a skill that earns you an extra $2,000 a month, the return on that investment is essentially incalculable. And unlike stocks or property, no one can take a skill away from you. Markets crash. Properties lose value, but a skill you've genuinely mastered stays with you permanently. Further up the risk scale are online businesses, dropshipping, selling digital products, content creation, service-based businesses. The potential upside is significant, but these require consistent effort, tolerance for failure, and a willingness to iterate until something works. Most people quit before they find the right model. The ones who don't often end up building something serious. Above that are individual stocks. It's tempting to try and pick the next breakout company, but unless you've done deep research and genuinely understand the business, you're largely guessing. Skilled investors spend hundreds of hours analyzing a single company before committing. Without that level of work, keep individual stock picks to a small, experimental portion of your portfolio and never treat it as your core strategy. At the top of the scale are alternative investments, Bitcoin, Ethereum, gold, collectibles, art, wine. Genuinely enormous gains have been made in these categories. Genuinely devastating losses have also been made. Treat these as speculative positions, money you're prepared to lose entirely, not as the foundation of your financial future. They can play a role once your foundation is solid, but they are not the foundation. If you're starting out, focus on index funds and developing a high-income skill. Build the base first. Everything else can be layered on as your confidence, knowledge, and capital grow. Now, how you invest is just as important as what you invest in, because if you're using the wrong type of account, you could be handing over thousands in unnecessary tax every single year without even realizing it. In the UK, the Stocks and Shares ISA allows you to invest up to £20,000 per year, and every gain you make, dividends, capital appreciation, everything, is completely tax-free. It's one of the most generous tax shelters available to ordinary people anywhere in the world. If you're employed, your workplace pension is also worth maximizing. You contribute around 5%, your employer typically adds 3% on top, and that employer contribution is essentially free money that goes straight to work for you. In the US, the Roth IRA is one of the most powerful accounts you can open. You invest money you've already paid tax on, it grows completely tax-free, and when you retire, you withdraw it with zero tax owed. The annual limit is $7,000 if you're under 50. Some of the wealthiest people in the world actively use this account, not because they need the tax break, but because it's genuinely one of the most efficient structures available. The 401k is the US equivalent of a workplace pension. Contributions come out of your paycheck pre-tax, growth is tax-deferred, and if your employer offers a match, taking full advantage of it should be one of the first financial moves you make. Wherever you are in the world, spend an hour researching the tax-advantaged accounts available in your country. The difference between investing inside and outside these structures compounds dramatically over time. Once your account is set up, automate a monthly transfer time to your payday so the money moves before you ever see it sitting in your account and get tempted to do something else with it. For the actual investment inside the account, a simple 3-fund portfolio is highly effective and used by serious long-term investors around the world. A U.S. stock index fund gives you exposure to the largest American companies. An international stock index fund covers companies outside the U.S., across Europe, Asia, and beyond. A bond fund provides stability, reducing volatility when equity markets move sharply in either direction. The exact split between these three depends on your age and risk tolerance. Younger investors can afford more exposure to stocks since they have decades to ride out downturns. As you get older, gradually shifting more weight toward bonds makes sense. Set the allocation, automate the contributions, and then step back. The temptation to check constantly and adjust based on short-term movements is one of the most expensive habits an investor can have. The people who build real wealth aren't the ones making clever moves every month. They're the ones who set up a solid system and stay consistent for years, then decades. Your main focus after automating this should be increasing your income so you can increase the amount going in. That's where skill building becomes the multiplier for everything else. The next 15% of your income goes towards stability. This is the portion that keeps you in the game when life does what life inevitably does. Not every pound or dollar you have should be going toward growth or being spent on living costs. A meaningful portion needs to be held in reserve specifically to protect the progress you've already made. I understand this because I failed to do it, and the consequences were significant. When I was young and needed a car to get to work, I had nothing saved. So I did what most people in that situation do, I took out a loan and bought a used car with a bit extra thrown in. For a few months, everything felt manageable. Then the engine failed completely. No emergency fund, no backup plan, no options. To keep my job, I had to borrow more, which added more interest, more pressure, and more anxiety to an already difficult situation. That car breakdown didn't just cost me money. It set my finances back by roughly a full year. If I'd had 15% consistently set aside, that situation would have been an inconvenience, not a crisis. That's the difference stability makes. Most people don't have a fundamental money problem. They have a stability problem. One unexpected expense, a medical bill, a car repair, a job loss, and the entire structure collapses. Even if you're actively investing, a sudden emergency could force you to liquidate investments at exactly the wrong moment, locking in losses you didn't need to take. Here's how to build your stability fund properly. First, calculate the target. List every core monthly expense, rent or mortgage, groceries, utilities, transport, essential insurance, and any services you genuinely need for work or basic functioning. Add those together to get your monthly baseline. Multiply that number by 5. That's your stability fund target. If your baseline is $1,500 a month, your target is $7,500. It sounds like a lot when you're starting, but 15% of every paycheck directed consistently toward this number will get you there faster than most people expect. 5 months of expenses gives you a genuine buffer, enough time to handle a serious disruption without being forced into bad financial decisions under pressure. Second, store it correctly. 3 non-negotiable rules. It must be accessible within 24 hours, because emergencies don't wait for processing delays. It must carry zero risk, meaning no stocks, no crypto, no bonds, nothing that can drop in value the week you need the money most. And it must earn something while it sits there, because letting cash sit in an account earning nothing means inflation is silently eroding its purchasing power every month. High-yield savings accounts currently offering 4 to 5% interest in many markets are the right home for this money. Liquid, insured, earning a return without any exposure to volatility. Third, build it as quickly as possible. Automate the 15% out on payday, same as the growth allocation. If you ever need to draw from it, replace the full amount the following month, treat it as a temporary loan to yourself that gets repaid immediately. Roundup apps can accelerate the build passively by saving small amounts from everyday purchases without requiring any active effort. Cashback credit cards, used responsibly and paid off in full each month, can redirect rewards directly into the fund. Once the fund reaches its target, the 15% that was going there can be redirected into growth investments or toward the final 10% category coming up next. The next 50% of your income goes toward essentials. This is the portion that sustains your life, not your image, not your status, not the version of yourself you want other people to see. More than 60% of Americans earning over $100,000 a year report living paycheck to paycheck, which on the surface makes no sense until you look at where the money is actually going. Lifestyle inflation is extraordinarily effective at consuming income at every level. As earnings rise, spending tends to rise proportionally or faster, which means the actual financial position, savings rate, net worth, runway, doesn't improve even as the number on the paycheck gets larger. The trap isn't low income. The trap is spending that expands to fill whatever income is available. Essentials, defined clearly and honestly, are the things that keep you alive and functional: rent or mortgage, groceries, utilities, transport, necessary insurance, and basic clothing, meaning what you actually need, not aspirational wardrobe additions. Everything else requires scrutiny. Subscription services you've forgotten about. Takeout that's become a default rather than a treat. A gym membership attached to a version of yourself from January. Streaming platforms that multiply quietly over time until you're paying for 4 services and watching one. Go through your last 3 months of bank statements with genuine honesty and categorize everything. The number that comes back is often surprising, and not in a good way.
The reason 50% is the target rather than 60 or 70, which is where most people actually land, is that the constraint forces real decisions. It's not about being punishing or unnecessarily restrictive. It's about creating a gap between income and essential spending that makes everything else in this system possible. Without that gap, there's nothing left for growth, nothing left for stability, and the whole structure collapses. The two categories worth addressing directly because they tend to dominate essential spending are housing and transport. On housing, this is typically the single largest line item in anyone's budget, and the instinct most people have is to upgrade it as income increases. Bigger apartment, nicer neighborhood, more space. That's exactly how lifestyle creep operates in its most expensive form. When your lease comes up for renewal, negotiate. Most landlords would rather hold on to a reliable tenant than go through the time, cost, and uncertainty of finding a new one. Even keeping rent flat in a rising market saves you thousands annually. House hacking, renting out a spare room, co-living arrangements, moving in with family temporarily while building capital, can dramatically accelerate the timeline for everything else in this system. On transport, car payments on depreciating vehicles are one of the most reliable ways to slowly drain wealth over years without it feeling dramatic. A reasonable monthly payment on a new car feels manageable in isolation. Add insurance, maintenance, fuel, and parking, and the real cost becomes substantial. By used and reliable, let someone else absorb the steepest depreciation curve. In cities with functional public transport, the case for not owning a car at all is genuinely strong. The monthly savings free up capital that can go directly into investments. Beyond those two categories, the most important tool for managing essential spending isn't a budget spreadsheet. It's a decision-making system you run automatically when you're considering any non-obvious purchase. The process is straightforward. Is this an impulse? If yes, enforce a 7-day waiting period before buying. After 7 days, most impulse purchases no longer feel necessary. The emotional momentum has passed and the actual value is clearer. If you still want it after 7 days, ask whether you're paying for genuine quality and utility or primarily for a brand and what it signals about you. If it's brand, skip it. There's almost always a functional equivalent that does the job without the premium. If it's genuine value, ask one final question: will this actually improve your daily life in a concrete way? If yes, buy it without guilt. If the honest answer is no, leave it. The system doesn't require perfect discipline. It just requires running the check. Over time, it becomes faster and more automatic, and the decisions improve almost without effort.
The final 10% of your income goes toward rewards. This is the portion that keeps the entire system sustainable. Because here's the honest reality: financial discipline practiced without any outlet doesn't produce long-term wealth. It produces burnout, resentment, and eventually a complete abandonment of the system. Studies consistently show that people who save aggressively without any designated spending for enjoyment are significantly more likely to have periods of severe overspending that wipe out weeks or months of progress. The 10% reward allocation isn't a concession to weakness. It's a structural feature that makes everything else work by ensuring the system has a release valve built in. The mechanics are simple. Open a separate account, label it something that makes its purpose clear, and automate 10% of your income into it every single month on payday. That account is yours to spend freely, on whatever genuinely matters to you, without guilt, without justification, without running it through the decision filter you use for essentials. The only rule is that when the balance reaches zero, you wait until next month. You don't borrow from growth, stability, or essentials to top it up. That constraint is intentional. It keeps the spending bounded while keeping it genuinely pleasurable.
If the fund is modest right now, prioritize experiences over purchases. A day spent somewhere you haven't been before costs less than most people expect and returns more than most things you could buy with the same money. The goal is to spend this 10% in a way that genuinely refuels you, not in a way that performs enjoyment for other people or fills a moment of boredom. Spend it on what you'll actually remember. When the balance hits zero, you stop and wait. That discipline, combined with the freedom within it, is what makes the reward category work as a sustainable feature rather than a weak point in the system. That's the complete 25-15-50-10 rule. 25% growing your future, 15% protecting your present, 50% sustaining your life, 10% making it worth living. Apply it consistently at any income level, and the results compound in every direction, financially, mentally, and in terms of the stability and freedom you're actually building toward.